My name is Mark Sedra, and I'm a senior fellow at CG and a member of the board of the Waterloo branch of the Canadian International Council, or CIC. And it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's event, which is titled Please Make It Stop, Traditional Portraiture in the Age of the 24-Hour News Cycle. And this is a joint event of CG and the Canadian International Council, or CIC. Now, I know many of you, I can see and I recognize many faces in the crowd. Many of you made it out to the Button Factory Gallery earlier this evening to see Daisy's work. And if you didn't, the show is going to run for the rest of the week, I believe. When is it going to run till? Sorry? Till the 11th of February. So you have some time to go in and see Daisy's work, which is fantastic. You can see a selection of it up here on the screen. Some of those works are in the gallery and some of them are not here for this event. Now, before I introduce Daisy and Christine, who will be speaking tonight, allow me to describe the genesis of tonight's event. I was visiting Christine Fair's home. Christine was here in the front row in Washington, D.C. last year when she informed me about this wonderful artist whom she had gone to college with, her undergraduate college with, and that was Daisy Rockwell. One of the main subjects of Daisy's art, which caught my attention immediately, was the War on Terror. She had painted portraits of famous terrorists and political leaders, from Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar to Sarah Palin and Barack Obama. I was immediately hooked. I poured over her paintings online in the days that followed and purchased two. Two of my purchases, in fact, have been displayed up on the screen. One was a portrait of John Walker Lind, the 20-year-old middle-class suburban American who joined the Taliban and was captured by coalition forces in 2001. The other depicts a young, gun-toting Dagestani Islamist couple. The woman in the painting, appearing the dominant of the two, was the suicide bomber behind the 2010 Moscow metro attack. Now, I have to admit, my wife was initially perplexed and frankly a little concerned about my mental health when I proposed hanging those pictures of a militant and a terrorist couple in our living room. But she has come to appreciate them as much as I do. But these, in my view, aren't ordinary portraits. The vibrant, almost jarring colors and designs, the motifs she uses in her painting, seemingly sheds new light on these dark figures, altering the viewer's perspective. Despite the terror that these subjects have inflicted or sought to inflict, inspiring the war on terror to combat them, one is compelled to consider their humanity, to look beyond their violent deeds and consider the reasons, beliefs, and motivations behind their acts. These paintings, in my view, seem to demystify their subjects and provoke the viewer to ask questions. Why, for instance, did John Walker Lind leave his comfortable suburban California life to fight with the Taliban? Why did this young Dagestani woman, at the height of her life, make the decision to kill herself and others in the Moscow subway? This is, of course, what art does. It can test the boundaries of controversial and emotionally charged subjects. Whether it's film, theater, visual arts, or even comedy, art is often the best medium or avenue to challenge existing orthodoxies. For instance, in my opinion, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, comedians who I would call artists, continue to provide the most trenchant critique of the American political system. Daisy's work impels us to question some of the prevailing imagery and messages, I would say even mythology, about the war on terror and the political machinations which drive it. Ideas spoon-fed to us by our media and political elite. Needless to say, I felt compelled to bring Daisy here to Waterloo to show and address her wonderful work. Daisy's provocative art is developing quite a following, being exhibited across North America. Art is in her blood, of course, with both of her parents being artists and her grandfather being one of the most prominent American artists of the 20th century. But that is not all Daisy does. She also holds a PhD She is particularly well known for her excellent work on Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I must say, she is no armchair analyst. She spends a great deal, if not half, of her time in the field, taking on significant risk while doing so. Chris is a regular contributor to mainstream media outlets and has authored scores of publications on the security and politics of South Asia. But I would be remiss if I did not mention that one of her most impressive books is actually a cookbook. It's called Cuisines of the Axis of Evil and Other Irritating States, a dinner party approach to international relations. It combines Christine's sharp wit and love of cooking, and I can tell you I've enjoyed her love of cooking at her house before, so I highly recommend this book. So without further ado, I would like to invite Daisy to the stage to deliver her talk. So please welcome.
Hi, thank you. I've a little bit of a throat thing, so I'm hoping I don't suddenly cough because this microphone is very sensitive, so you're going to get some sound effects. I'd like to thank CG and the Button Factory for inviting me for this series of events, and especially Mark Sedra for organizing it, and also Fred Kunz and Colleen Fitzpatrick and Heather Franklin and all of the staff at both of the places. Asking an artist to speak about making art can be an exercise in futility. It's roughly the equivalent of asking an athlete to speak about playing sports. Imagine watching an exciting moment of, say, a basketball game. At the commercial break, reporters rush up and ask the player who scored the winning basket what he was thinking at that crucial moment. He says, well, I guess I was just thinking about how I had to get the ball down the court and get it into the basket. And I can sympathize. Sometimes words fail. When people ask me what I was thinking when I painted something, I want to say, well, I just kept putting paint on the canvas and then eventually it turned out okay. So when I stand up here today to talk about my painting, I have to do it less as the artist and more as a critic. Once the painting is done, I can step aside and try to figure out what just happened there. In a sense, I'm just as qualified to talk about the subject of my artwork as any other critic. It's just that I happen to have a uniquely close relationship with the artist. So let's take a look at this artwork of Daisy Rockwell and see what we can make of it. One of the first things that people often ask me is, why do you paint so many terrible people? I'm going to try to operate the slideshow here. The question is about, I've painted many terrible people. Osama bin Laden, there's Sarah Palin. These are the Abu Ghraib torturers. There's Saddam Hussein getting his teeth checked. There's Gaddafi. And of course, Osama bin Laden has been a favorite of mine. So I think the first terrible person I painted was Osama bin Laden. As is usually the case, I didn't really know why I wanted to paint bin Laden. I just went ahead and did it. It was a fascinating process. The first thing I noticed was that there weren't many photographs to choose from for models. Bin Laden lived in hiding for a very long time, and the few high-resolution photographs of him are mostly taken from the same press conference. I finally found one I liked, and I set to work. As I worked, I could stare at his face for a long time. As I painted him, I felt as though I was getting to know him better and better. He transformed before my eyes, and I noticed for the first time that he was very handsome, and I felt that he was a sensitive man. A few months after I made the painting, my father, who was also an artist, called me and asked me if I could donate any of my work for a charity auction for an art school. I haven't made very many paintings, I said. I could send you bin Laden, though. Yes, he said, send that one. Who would want to buy that? I heard in his voice curiosity mingled with faint derision. I sent the painting. After the auction, I learned that bin Laden was one of the first paintings to be sold to a somewhat misanthropic frame maker who keeps bin Laden very nicely framed, hanging from the rafters of his frame shop. People look up, he says, and suddenly the conversation stops dead, and they say, "What is he doing here?" Since painting Bin Laden, I've painted numerous other public figures, not all of them bad. I've become obsessed with particular individuals in the news. Someone like Sarah Palin, for example, is similar to Bin Laden, and that it is almost impossible to think of her as a real human being. Media of all types, not just television, enlarge and distort such figures until they're like giant balloon floats in a parade. I became fascinated with Sarah Palin's identification with guns, war, and hunting. I did a series of paintings that each included Sarah Palin and a dead animal, a fish, a moose, and one with a bear skin and a giant crab. A friend to whom I showed this painting asked, "What is the significance of the crab?" To which I replied, it was on her coffee table in her office when she was the governor of Alaska. So it's important to stress from that story that I am a strict realist in all of my work. I painted the crab because there was a crab on her, which I didn't put in a crab. So I make up colors and patterns and so forth, but virtually all my paintings are based on real found photographs which I come across when I'm scouring Google image search. I did, for example, a series of world leaders with their pets. Oops. There's Putin. That was a puppy given to him by the Bulgarian premier. And there's Musharraf with his two puppies named Buddy and Dom. But this is one exception. I only once invented a pet, a Persian cat for Ahmadinejad in job. That's because I saw pictures of protests when he was at the UN. Somebody had a big sign that said, "Putting the purr back in Persian." I don't know why they said that. But suddenly I felt like I had to put the purr back in Persian too. So this is actually the cover of a small jewelry box. It's covered with glitter. Painting with people with their pets, I found, brings out further dimensions of their humanness. I always feel that I learn more about the people I'm painting during this process. Hillary Clinton, for example. Here she is pictured during her days as First Lady with the first cat, Socks. I felt from painting this that she was not an affectionate person. She just doesn't care about Socks at all. He's obviously a very bright cat. George Bush, on the other hand, loves his Scotty dog Barney. I painted numerous pictures of Bush with Barney, and I was surprised to learn that it was his relationship with this dog, it was in this relationship with this dog that one could find in him genuine compassion. You can see how deep their relationship is. Every now and then I get lucky. Like when I found a picture of this young man and his cat. This is Mohammed Alessa, who was arrested on his way to the airport where he and a friend planned to board a plane to go and join a militant group in Somalia. Alessa was one of the FBI's big catches, alleged terrorists foiled in the process of hatching plots. As is usually the case with these characters, the story quickly fell apart, with the FBI informant proving to have worked diligently to incite otherwise not very effective people into evil doings. The photo on which this painting was based came from Alessa's mother, who said that her son had wanted to take his cat, Tuna Princess, with him to join the militant group, but she had refused to allow it. So instead he stole a large bag of candy from the family's convenience store and took it with him to the airport, where the FBI confiscated it. I've painted many of these wannabe terrorists, and by the end of the paintings, I tend to just feel very sorry for them. One notable exception, however, is Colleen LaRose, also known as Jihad Jane. This is our poster image. Each wannabe terrorist has a nom de guerre given to them by the press or the FBI to make them feel a little bit more talked about politics or anything. She had a secret double life online where she became self-radicalized. This is her in her other avatar as a self-radicalized person, which is what the FBI calls it when someone just decides to come up with a terror plot on their own without an FBI informant to help them. Look at her face. There's a hard asymmetry about it. She's very scary, she's just very lady. So what's the point of all this? Why bother pondering the humanity of people who commit inhumane acts or plot to commit such acts? Who cares if Sarah Palin wants to be associated with hunting, or if Vladimir Putin likes to ride horses bare-chested in Siberia? Come on. This brings me back to my original point about discussing art, and also to the title of the talk, Please Make It Stop, Traditional Portraiture in the Age of the 24-Hour News Cycle. We hear all the time that we are in the midst of an information age. We also talk about living in a media-saturated environment. What does that mean? We are bombarded around the clock with news and information, and we are also bombarded with visual images from around the world, some of them very beautiful, others very disturbing. When you open the paper in the morning or check the news online or switch on the TV, you are assaulted with a deluge of visual media: violence, floods, famine, celebrities, world leaders, sports, earthquakes, suffering, opulence. There are many things that frankly I would rather not know about. Some news items and some photographs are so disturbing I quickly turn the page or click on a new link. At other times I find myself utterly desensitized. We're used to seeing African children starving, birds covered in oil slick, Bangladeshis clinging to their rooftops and swirling floodwaters, the dead bodies of bombing victims. My goal as an artist is to reach out and grab these moments and freeze them in time, to make myself stop and focus and try to understand what I'm looking at. I want to question dominant media narratives about who is bad and who is good and who our enemies are and who are our friends. And most importantly, I want to discuss this circuit of visual information by means of visual imagery. I strongly believe that we experience visual information in ways that cannot necessarily be dealt with by using language. Sometimes words really do fail. Toward this end, I've been working on ways of presenting words and images side by side in such a way that they offer parallel critiques. One does not describe the other, rather they work in tandem to offer a critique that a viewer can respond to, both visually and intellectually. I'd like to close by reading a short piece that exemplifies this approach. I wrote this essay after bin Laden was killed and made 3 paintings to go along with it. It was originally posted on the blog Chapati Mystery, for which I write occasionally. And I should also add that this essay and these paintings will be included in a small book of my art and essays on the war on terror that is coming out next month, called The Little Book of Terror. So this essay is called Funny Face, after the Gershwin song. After watching Gone with the Wind at an impressionable age, I became obsessed with the flexibility of Clark Gable's eyebrows. I endeavored for many months afterwards to develop the muscles necessary to produce similar effects with my own eyebrows. I now bear the mark of my success on my 42-year-old face, a surprising fountain of wrinkles, originating from my left eyebrow shooting up through my hairline, seemed to have materialized overnight. At night, brushing my teeth before the mirror, I stared intently at the wrinkles and tried to produce the facial expressions that put them there. And then I naturally think about age, and about death, and about Osama bin Laden's face, and what exactly the Navy SEALs did to it that made photographs of his face unfit for public consumption. Whenever an impossibly famous individual disappears without a public viewing of the body, and sometimes even then, for example Elvis, rumors abound as to whether the personage in question is actually dead. The curious decision to keep from the public the image that would prove the kill of bin Laden Laden has naturally fueled an abundance of theories about whether or not bin Laden was actually killed. So that members of the United States government might not feel inclined to indulge in such conspiracy theorizing in the case of bin Laden, the White House set up a limited access peep show to which selected individuals of prominent stature, such as John McCain, were invited to see the booty captured and killed by our boys. They came away convinced, slightly shaken, perhaps a little bit horrified, but gratified that with their tremendous stature came access to the nation's top drawer death porn. Were his brains blown out, his eyes shot from his head, and if his face was revoltingly disfigured, how then would such a photograph make indisputable his identity in death? What vestige of his face was left to prove John McCain with a photo that we had our man? This is my bin Laden death mask. With the capture of Saddam Hussein a few years ago, the captors chose to distribute a humiliating image of the former leader sticking his head out of a foxhole, groggy, ungroomed, a wild-eyed old man blinking in the sudden light of the sun. He was in the bottom of the hole with no way to fight back, reported the Major General Raymond Odierno proudly. He was caught like a rat. The photograph was depressing as it was convincing. And in any event, he was executed eventually. Bloodlust satisfied, conspiracy theories crushed, unless it was one of his doubles. In Osama's case, at least, there is said to be a photo, and there is said to have been a body, now swimming with the fishes off the coast of Karachi. In the case of the alleged killing of Pakistani militant Elias Kashmiri by drone in 2011, there seems no way of proving the deed. As Interior Minister Rahman Malik put it, officials were 98% sure that Kashmiri was one of the humans blown up by the drone. The target was said to be taking his tea in an orchard at the time, an image that bears with it a fragile, civilized gentility in comparison with the CIA's not particularly covert video game-like military operation in Pakistan. Soon after he was supposedly killed, Kashmiri's family gave an almost irritable interview that seemed rather pointed in its criticism of the missing father and husband. He doesn't call, he doesn't write. If you're reading this right now, Elias Kashmiri, you should know that your family is not pleased with your behavior. He didn't even send any money. They said they believed he was dead when they had proof. Of course, they'll never have it. The United States has become too fastidious to parade its victims' heads in the village square. That's the end of my talk.
So this is going to make it sound like a stalker. But Daisy Rockwell, she knows this, I told her this, has been my hero since first day one in graduate school. So Daisy was a brilliant linguist. She began her career as a classicist. I remember her in the C shop, studying various Greek, Latin, and whatnot. And her genius was absolutely apparent as an undergraduate. She was the smartest, most interesting, most colorful person in the room. If she wasn't the first person you would remember just by visual appearance, she would certainly be the person that would stay with you if you had a chance to hang out with her. In fact, when Daisy switched from studying the classics to South Asia, she also became my first Hindi teacher. So in some sense, it's Daisy's fault that I became interested in South Asia. She was absolutely a brilliant teacher. And one of the things that I find really interesting about it, so we had a number of really boring seminars together in graduate school. I won't mention Sheldon Pollock's name. Oh my God, 4 hours of just endless, monotonous tyranny. And she had these beautiful doodles. I used to love watching Daisy doodle. And you always had these really interesting colors of pens, purples, greens. And so many of those images that I remember doodling in graduate school are actually appearing in these different motifs in the painting. So it was, after many years, we sort of went off and we did our own thing. I became a big drone proponent. When I first met Mark, I was at a conference, a scholarly conference, when I was exploring the virtues of drones so much I wanted to get a drone Hastings. Still a big supporter of drones. But actually, so we reconnected many, many years later because of her work, actually, on the War on Terror. exhibit, her portraits had to be very small, so the scale is incredibly misleading.
Yeah.
So how did you settle into this?
It was sort of by chance. I left my academic job. I was an academic administrator, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I told some people at the show, I started taking an etching class. And I actually wasn't sure. I got ready to start my first etching, and I suddenly thought, I don't know what to do at all. You know, I was very excited to etch. And printmaking, for those who don't know, it's very complicated. They use metal plates and burn into them and stuff like that. I don't know what the subject is going to be. And I just was drawing a blank. I hadn't done any art for about 15 years. And for some reason, I don't know why, but Muhammad Ali Jinnah talked to me when he's the first leader of Pakistan, founder of Pakistan. And I just took a little photograph and I based this etching on that. And I did another etching of him, and I did another etching of him, and I did another etching of him, and I did another one. And by this point, my etching teacher was a little bit confused. He said, you know, why are you doing this? And I said, I don't know. I just didn't know. I had no idea why I was doing it. And then I made like 20 things, 20 small watercolors of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. I still wasn't really sure what I was doing. And even to this day, I don't really know why, because that's part of what art is about. You feel like if your creative juices are flowing, you feel like you're receiving transmissions. Like the message comes down, you send it out. But I think one of the things is that I had taught many courses about the partition of India and Pakistan, and when I was teaching at university, and I had become very fascinated with the figure of Jinnah. But I decided that there were things that I had to say about Jinnah that were not verbal. And this is where I was trying to get at a little bit of my hook there. You know, that we can talk with words as much as we want, but sometimes we're still not saying the thing that we're thinking, because that thing is not made out of words. And that's what art does, is that it expresses things that are not made out of words. And so I realized that I had things to say about Jinnah that I hadn't said in the classes that I taught, because I couldn't, because I was using words and the words were not expressing what I thought. And so then I started to sort of get more excited about these things, and I did a modern portrait, because I had become very obsessed with the news. I was reading a lot of news. I was unemployed also, so I was reading a lot of news. And I just became very obsessed with certain figures. I even made a painting with the Pope at that time, and Mullah Omar, and just sort of controversial figures drew my eye. And I actually, part of the miniature painting, I love Indian miniature painting, that's one influence, but also we lived in California in this tiny house, and my studio was this big, and I had this easel that was like, like I just didn't have any room, so that's part of what made everything so small. You paint with the materials that you have, as to paraphrase Alan Roosevelt.
The army you wanted. So when you take on a subject, for example, a lot of your characters are really obscure. So when I first started, stalking you online, I was really struck by the repertoire. Particularly since we're both South Asians, we both went to the same PhD program as a South Asianist. You really do live in this world of South Asia. And in South Asia, I'm probably one of the oddballs, which is why I'm already tenure. One of many reasons. But most people that say South Asia, they really focus on like North India, or they're the oddball that does South India, and then of course there's that whole, Bengal contingent that talks about 18th century lesbian quilting beads and Bhadra Calcutta. Right. So I was really blown away at how your imagination was just so beyond South Asia. Many of the folks that you're painting are so obscure. Do you spend a lot of time reading about them, like the jockstrap jihadist, for example? how did you find a picture of him when he was that young? Did you spend a lot of time learning about him?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on the people that I paint. I mean, because, this might be part of the research training that we have. I just do tons and tons of research. I read all of them, and I do tons of Google image search. I try to do it in different languages if I can. You can even just use Google Translate. Like I was trying to get a better picture of Putin with the bare chest on the horse, and I wasn't getting good pixelation. So I did Google Translate. I translated into Russian, Putin bare-chested horse, or something like that. And I added that into Google, and I got some great stuff.
So do you know Russian as well?
I don't know Russian, I just use Google Translate.
Oh, yes, that's Google Translate.
Yeah. So, I use that because you get, the problem is that Google image search is all driven by words, and it depends on, if you use one language, you may get something different, like say images of Egypt. If you plug it in Arabic, you're going to get something better.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So is it a fair question to ask you about your tacos?
Oh yeah, that's Tacos is a Urdu word for pseudonym, and Urdu literature. Everybody has a pseudonym. Like that's you just have to have a pseudonym where you go, what kind of an author are you? So everyone has a pseudonym, and it's usually a noun or adjective or something that describes the writer in some way or part of their experience. And in the script, it's marked with this little mark over it to show that this is right here is the published. Because in a lot of times the poets will put their pseudonym within a poem because it's a noun, it's a word. So when I quit my job, a friend of mine, the one that runs the blog, Chapati Industry, he asked me to write for this blog, and I said I don't want to. I don't want to be a public. I'm retreating from public life. It's not equal. You can have a pseudonym, and I won't tell anybody who you are. So I chose the pseudonym La Papa, which means it can mean anonymous, and it also means disappeared, and it could mean clueless, it means all different things. So I chose that Papalis and wrote on the blog, and then I started uploading my paintings. And then it became time to sign my paintings, and I started signing the paintings with Lapta, which I still do. I said, for a long time, nobody knew who I was on the blog, and they thought that I was this interesting Pakistani artist. I started to realize to get fan mail, and I started to feel kind of uncomfortable with that, because I didn't want people to think, there's all these cases of people masquerading online as something that they're not, like, Syrian lesbians or whatever was that.
Yes.
So I didn't want to do that, so I have come out more as kind of what I became the Tacos for my painting. And also there's a sort of a family issue. I felt every time I would go to write Daisy Rockwell, my painting, I think of my grandfather's signature, this big square letters Norman Rockwell. And I felt like I was signing his name, I have his name in mind, and it just felt too close. So now I use this Urdu thing, which is also very pretty because it doesn't look like there's a little design in the corner. So if you, when they're flashing by the paintings, you can see the right corners in my tacos.
So can you talk about your colors? So I asked her to do a picture of Jalali Haqqani. And so, it was very hard for me. We couldn't find a picture of him laughing. And trying to find a picture, of a laughing Jalali Haqqani wasn't all that easy, it turns out. We did find one. And so she sends me this email, and she says, well, are there any colors that they really don't like? So I'm not like a pink lover. So it's not my favorite color. My husband really hates pink. So she sends me the picture that he just came out pink. I fell in love with him. The Liberace Haqqani really glitter on it. A lot of glitter. There's just a certain genius of Haqqani done in pink that my husband was like, yeah, that's really weird. That's like a really nice with funny faces of the modern portrait.
Yeah.
So it's going to go right next to funny face with the oddly
fast, and it's very small pieces of paper. And the cat jumped and woke her up. Don't blame me. I find my daughter asleep for a little while, and I painted them, and then I was so surprised because it came out looking very genial. Oh, and a friend on Facebook said, you make him look like a lovable scamp. And I said, that's because I think maybe he is, you know. So I feel like I make these discoveries when I'm painting, that I find out things, you know, it's a little bit crazy, but I felt like after I painted him, he's not the one. He's not in charge. Somebody else is in charge. He's just this foolish guy that somebody's playing him like he's the puppet. I don't know who the puppet master is. So that's the same with Tony. It's not that I don't think he's doing things, but you know, he probably has a side he's probably fun to chat with.
This is what I've heard.
Fun guy. You know, I mean, you don't necessarily go in thinking this, but like with George Bush, you know, he really does care about Barney. He loves Barney.
It's funny so when you actually meet some of these characters, so it was like, I find her portraits really, they connect to my macabre sense of humor about these guys. So I remember in 2007, and you just can't make this kind of crap up because it's just so GWAT. So I went up to Herat. At the time I was working with the United Nations, and I was tasked with doing their suicide bombing report, and they had captured a suicide bomber in Herat. And so I roll up, and it was very unusual because Herat shares a border with Iran. So it's when you're in Herat, it looks actually like Iran. It's difficult to discern where you are if you didn't actually know. And the folks there, they largely speak only Dari with very Farsi accents. So of course this fellow happened to be from Pakistan. Mm-hmm. He was the most Pakistani in the most Persian of all places in Afghanistan. And they didn't know how to talk to him. There was no one that knew Urdu. Mm-hmm. And so the NDS chief, which is the local Afghan spy agency in this really horrible suit, he says, oh my gosh, you know Urdu. Do you want to go and meet this guy? And I was like, hell yeah. So they take us to the site where I was with another colleague of mine from the UN, and they take us into this room with this overstuffed, like leopard print, horrible garish wardrobe couch. And I was always shrouded up. And I agreed to come in, and I'd seen pictures of him before he had been taken formally into captivity. By the time the guy is coming in, his jailer says to me in Dari, he's very tall, he's very handsome. And he said it in the most wickedly perverse tone you might possibly imagine. It was, in that he was communicating to me that, you know, in fact the gentleman had just been, you know, sodomized for the entire period of his captivity. And, you know, and so by the time he's brought in, he could barely walk. I mean, that's how horrible. I know, and actually, when you're confronted with that sort of, he's a suicide bomber, he's going to blow up 80 people, do I really care that you were Roger? But of course, yes, I do care. And so when you meet these people, you're confronted, at the end of the day, this was just a guy that was really scared shitless. You know, he didn't get blown up, he didn't get his virgins, and he spent the last 48 hours being sodomized by Afghan police, which I can only imagine how horrible that is. And then we actually started talking, and I asked him, well, why were you here? What were you trying to do? And he says, well, I was trying to kill Americans. I'm like, oh, bring back that Roger. You're done yet. It's already done. And by the time he figured out that, you know, in Afghanistan they had these things called provincial reconstruction teams, at that time, before this event, the Americans were there. Subsequently, the Italians came in. And he didn't know if the Italians were Kafirs. So he didn't think he was going to go and do the suicide attack with the Italians. So he decides that instead he's going to go and kill the head of Afghan intelligence. This guy is going around in Urdu. NDS got left there, you know, where is this NDS office? He's saying in Urdu in the most Persian place. So that's how the guy got caught. But, you know, we probably spoke to him for about 20 minutes. And at the end of the day, this guy was just a scared, shitless kid. He wasn't a madrasa student. He wasn't are really stupid.
I just always try that Trestle sheds on the Times Square over. It used to be like this sad sack. You know, like the more you read about him, like, just like he had this huge mortgage and like this terrible little job and, you know, and just a sad person. And then